whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube with inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching outside of the sphere.
Roger. There's troubleshooting.
So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Hi, this is Ryan Bledsoe, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
I'll unmute myself. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and just before we get into the show this week, I just want to remind everyone you can now get premium access to the podcast, not only on Patreon, which has been the only way to support in the past, but on Apple subscriptions as well. So all that extra content, ad-free, early access that I've talked about in the past is available as a 2-week free trial. There's an AMA with myself and Dan, and there's extra content from George Knapp, Ryan Bledsoe, David Marler, Sean Cahill, and others up there as well. And also from the guest I'm about to speak to as well, there'll be an extra 5-10 minutes of interview on there just as a thank you, folks. So again, appreciate it if you can check that out if you are on Apple. I have with me James Iandoli. James, have I said that right?
For the most part, yeah.
Oh, no, Iandoli.
How'd you know? There you go.
Yes, James. So James sent me this, and you'll know James as either James or James from Engaging the Phenomenon, the YouTube channel, the podcast. And I asked him about pronouncing his name properly, and he spelled it for me phonetically, and I still got it wrong. Second attempt, though. You'll give me that one. Second attempt.
That's too many vowels. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah, well, listen, you've seen my surname probably spelled out. It's not even worth going into. But listen, James, thank you very much for joining us. And we were just saying before recording, it's probably well past due. But looking forward to having you on.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, man. Thanks. It's I remember when you first started your podcast. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, I remember it too. It's the year and a bit has flown by, and you were one of the good guys who reached out to me quite early on as well, asking if I would join in on one of your Ask UFO Twitter videos, and there's a lot of cool ones up there as well, and I am horrendous for saying yes and then telling you like 5 or 6 times, oh yeah, I'll send the video over, and I just end up not doing it. But James gets, I've got kids, and you're the same, you've got a family and stuff as well, and life gets in the way, but I am going to be better at that in the future because the videos are worth being on, and there's some esteemed company in those as well. So we're going to get to all of that as well, James. But the timing's really good of this. You've come off the back of a big interview. You've just spoken to Luis Elizondo. I know he's been doing the rounds the last few months in the media, not just from the podcasting and YouTube circuit, but he has been on Fox, CNN, and all that stuff. So to speak to the man, and everyone's getting a chance to speak to Lou. I don't think many have necessarily done it the justice that you managed to do. So you really made the most of your time. I feel that. So well done on that. Your questions were different, a different approach. It wasn't cookie cutter. And if people haven't listened to it yet, then please go out your way to find Engaging the Phenomenon's channel and go and watch the interview with Lou. How do you feel now, a week past the interview? How you feel it went? Would you have changed anything?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't anticipate it would be that great either. Some things I had planned, some things were off the cuff. And, it wasn't, that interview was not for everybody. That's for the research community, the people who are deep into this, because some of the questions I was asking, it's not for a mainstream audience. So I think people within the community will appreciate it more than somebody who's, just trying to be introduced to the subject of UFOs. They're probably not going to understand half of what I'm talking about. And, again, that interview was for me. That was for the research community. That was for the CE5 community and the UFO community.
Well, I would urge people to go and check that out. And if you haven't yet, and like James has just mentioned, the CE5 community, we're going to be talking a lot about that because many of your questions that were sent in, and I told James this before we hit record, that people were saying to me, I don't necessarily have questions I want you to read, but I just want to know how CE5 works, and we're going to get into that and get right to the basics of it as well. But what I want to start with before we talk about CE5 is your journey to this point. Like, what was it that kind of kickstarted your journey into CE5, UFOs, aliens, and all that stuff? Does it go back to childhood?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I had experiences early on, not just with, what people would call UFO intelligence, but also, metaphysical experiences, out of body experiences that to me, when I was very young, they were very vivid. And it would happen often enough where, I didn't think it was a fluke. I looked at it as some kind of genuine experience of some kind. So even from an early age, I was very open to all this stuff, and I pursued it. All that stuff on 1990s television. They had UFO shows on and things like that. And to me, I just I looked at it as something that was pretty normal. And it wasn't like, oh, I better watch out. I'm watching or I'm reading into this and I feel weird about it. Nah, it seemed all pretty normal to me.
What sort of experiences are you talking about? Under what circumstances?
I had some experiences when I was younger that I really don't want to go into. I would say that they, at that age, they were frightening, I guess I can say. And I can't say that it's 100% correlated with the UFO phenomenon, but you could consider them entities. But I have a hunch, in retrospect, after all these years, and even when I was having experiences in 2007, that kind of clicked for me where I said, okay, maybe this is associated with this. I did have some UFO sightings when I was younger, and but none of those sightings were kind of extraordinary in the sense like the ones that I had in 2007.
And your experiences again in 2007, is that something you're open to discussing, or again, is it more of a personal thing?
Yeah, the 2007 ones, that's when things kind of came to a head. So at the point in 2007, I had all these different kind of experiences when I was younger. And I was researching UFOs at that point too. So it wasn't like I wasn't into the subject. But then a series of events occurred that I see kind of as one major point in my life, I guess. And actually, I have a video on it on my YouTube channel called Dreamtime Contact. And this is actually where it started, because there was a series of events. So this Dreamtime Contact one I'll kind of briefly go through, because it's related to the future events that happen. So I was at work. I was working an overnight, and right before I'm about to leave, I'm talking to one of my coworkers. He's like a super skeptic, this guy, super atheist or agnostic, very rational minded. Anytime you would kind of bring up a subject that's considered woo, like consciousness or ESP or, anything like that, this guy would just, not, he wasn't kind of open to that kind of stuff. So my conversations with him were very like, hey, how's your family? How are the kids? Nice weather. Nice guy though. And so one day he says to me out of the blue, hey, did you hear about the UFO sightings in Mexico? And I found it very strange that he asked me that. And I said, no, because I hadn't heard about it. And he didn't know about my interest in any of this. So that was very interesting to me. But then I kind of just brushed it off, went home. And I went home, I went to sleep, and I had this insane lucid dream that I'm driving down one of my old streets in this dream. And it's nighttime, and there's a UFO hovering like 20 feet above me, and it's this electric orange. There's like static or some kind of electricity coming from it that I can feel through my body, and it's humming, and I'm just very reactive because it's a dream, and I'm trying to get away from it, man. I'm just like driving really fast and like trying to escape it, and I can't get away from it. And maybe after like 2 minutes as my time in this dream, I woke up and I was just kind of, when you snap out of a dream, you're trying to collect yourself. And then, again, it was an overnight that I worked. So I wake up in the afternoon, and one of my family members comes home and comes up to me and say, hey, did you hear about the UFO sightings in Mexico? So I'm like, okay, screw this. Because at this point, it's like there's too many coincidences going on. And I'm like, the hell with this. I'm going to go out and there's this Chinese food down the street, Chinese food place down the street from me that I went to a lot. So I'm like, whatever, I'm just going to go there, get some Chinese food and start my day and whatever. So I get into my car and I'm driving maybe, 200 or 250 feet. And I just see this fireball in the sky, and it's stationary. And as soon as I think that's an effing UFO, it starts to move. And I'm like, holy shit, basically. I'm like, what the frick is going on? And, I said before that, the sighting itself. So, and I tried to chase it. It ended up going out of sight and I couldn't see it anymore. And I, went all the way this way and it was just out of sight. But it hit me like a ton of bricks at that point. Again, because, the sighting in itself was remarkable. You have this fireball. You can tell it was low from the size, how big it was. It was much bigger than like a planet or a star, anything like that. Way bigger than like the International Space Station. So it had to have been low. Either that or it was ginormous. But I tend to think it was just lower in the atmosphere. Maybe 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet in the air. And I just was in like shock almost that all these things that had occurred that led up to that point were just as crazy as the sighting, if not more crazy. So that really made me take a deep dive into the UFO subject even more. Like, I was already into it, but after that, I'm start reading more books and stuff like that, and so and actually at that time I'm already practicing meditation. So, but anyway, so going past that, just that kind of started this whole string of events that happened. Now, probably I want to say maybe 3 months later. I have to look at the actual months that where it took place, but it was about, I want to say 2-3 months later. I was in this car accident, and so at the time I thought it was a near death experience. Obviously, I wasn't that as badly messed up as I thought I was. So now I call it a trauma-induced OBE. So a trauma-induced out-of-body experience, where I was above the entire scene of the crash, and when that happened, I thought I was dead. From my awareness, like I had the awareness to think, oh, so that's it, huh? And I saw the car accident and all this, and during that whole thing, I came face to face with this being, and I was just, I don't know, I had this sense of oneness, not just with the being, but with the entire universe, and then it kind of just. That part ended, and I end up waking up in a hospital bed and all that. But the almost more significant part of that was the next day, the following day. I get home, and I'm just in my room, cleaning my room. I grateful to be alive, and I'm like, even though that was a very transformative experience, because again, when that whole thing happened, there was like no regrets. I was like totally cool at that point with the idea that I was basically dead, I guess you can say, right? So it was very transformative in that it shows you something way deeper about reality is the only way I can explain it. And so it's the next day, I'm in my room, I'm cleaning, grateful to be alive, and even to have had the experience. I'm still kind of, not completely centered yet to where I was before this happened. I'm still kind of affected by it, I guess, still in the aftermath. And then out of nowhere, I have this voice come into my entire body. I can feel the whole, I can feel it throughout my body and in my mind. And it said, "Come outside." But as soon as I heard, that voice, I instantly knew everything that was happening. I knew that I was going to go outside and there's going to be some craft there, and I can't explain how, but I instantaneously, people would call this like a telepathic lock on, knew what was going to take place to some extent. So I ran outside and, I moved past where the trees were and I can hear humming. So I look directly above me and, there's just this, craft, and it's almost like a hexagon. Like it has 6 sides but the edges are rounded. They're not, like flat and sharp, and it's a dark metal. So it's like not an orb or something. This is like a physical, craft, almost like a disc, but again, like a hexagon, and it's humming. And I just have this entire, elated feeling. I am overwhelmed with joy. And because that's the feeling that I got from this connection, I could call it, with these entities. And I'm freaking out, but it's still moving. It's like just moving slowly and silently, and it can't be more than 80 feet above me. And it's still humming, and then it disappears and then reappears across the street over this lake where I lived. And it has all these lights going around it, like blue, white, green, red, yellow, just swirling around it. And then other ones appeared. There was that one, and then 2 other ones appeared, and there was a whole event that took place where they're appearing and disappearing, and moving around the sky slowly for almost a half an hour. But before that had passed, I ran into my house, and 2 of my family members were there. And I said, "Come outside." They're like, "Why?" I said, "They're here." And they're saying, "Who's here?" I said, "Just come outside." So I took my family members outside, and they were able to witness it. And, I have to imagine they were just as amazed as me. And, after actually that half hour, so the way that this whole kind of sighting ended was that 2 of them were flying towards each other like this. And the lights are spinning around while they're heading towards each other. And as soon as they're about to crash, and I'm thinking in my head, holy shit, they're going to crash. As soon as they make contact, they just both disappeared. And that ended that. And, when this happened, I'm like, dude, this is it. This is going to be all over the news, and it's going to be disclosure tomorrow. Like, I remember, this is insane. And, I called some friends and told them what happened or whatever, but I'm looking on the news and stuff, and nothing, it was just nothing. And, there was never, I didn't see any UFO reports cited on that day or whatever, but it was just, again, I thought it was disclosure was happening, but apparently it didn't. So that whole string of events occurred within a few months, and that's actually what led me to CE5. Because
thanks for sharing that. That's pretty intense. Okay, and just a bit of a recap, like you've said there, you had those childhood experiences and very personal. You then, further down the line, you see this fireball in the sky that's preceded by being asked about UFO sightings, and then someone else asks you in the family about UFO sightings. You then see this fireball that you're in the car, and then you're in this accident that, like you say, it wasn't as bad an accident that you had a near-death experience, but it was trauma-induced out of body, which then leads you to the following day having this really intense experience and closer kind of contact experience as well. That's incredible. Do you think all of this stuff happened to you? Do you think you were just born in tune to these sorts of experiences, or do you think they've happened for a reason?
I mean, in my own ego idea, right? My own reality, I tend to think there's a reason for it, right? But I'm just as open to the idea that it's just a roll of the dice, right place, right time. And, part of me being on this quest is I hope I find out, because I don't have all the answers. I wish I had the answers to that. And those questions actually very early on, like, is there a reason for this? Was that I had these experiences drove me. That was part of the initial drive for me, pursuing this, engaging the phenomenon, right? Because I had these encounters and I wanted to engage the phenomenon and not kind of just be a bystander.
Now, that's as good a reason as any to want to try and get in touch or contact whatever entities or beings may be at play within all of this is very personal to you as well. Now, that's when I'm going to start talking now about CE5. Okay, did you come into this looking for CE5, or was it known by something else? Now, CE5, as some people may know, is a little bit more of a franchise these days for some. But if you want to just talk a little bit about what it was known as when you came into it and explain what CE5 or human initiated contact is.
Okay, sure. I just want to give a little backstory on that, just to say, so after those experiences, I just went into like a deep dive. I found the Disclosure Project. I found Dr. Greer's work because of the Disclosure Project. I was amazed something like that happened with all these high-level witnesses in Washington, D.C., 2001. And I'm thinking, like, how did I not hear this happen? So, in the midst of that, I was like, who is this guy who set this up? And this random guy I had never heard of. And that's Dr. Stephen Greer. So I started to look into him, like, who's Stephen Greer? I don't know if it was Google at that time or which search engine it was, but I ended up finding his work on CE5. So at that point, CE5 was known. CE5 actually was known starting in like 1992. So I got heavily involved into the CE5 work because, after having those experiences, I never really thought, oh, let me try to reach out to this intelligence. So when I found CE5, I'm like, why didn't I even think of that? You know what I mean? This is still early on, right after I found right after I had the experiences, I found this work. So that's why I got involved with the CE5 work. And I actually created the first social networks of CE5 back in around maybe 2009. So CE5 was created by Dr. Greer, the terminology and the protocols. But what we call CE5 is, it's human-initiated contact. That whole idea goes back hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. So again, CE5 is a human-initiated contact, and under Dr. Stephen Greer, he has his own protocols for doing that. But there was another group called Mission Rama who were doing the same, I want to say like 90% the same exact thing that Dr. Greer was doing, but he was doing it in 1974 in Lima, Peru. And there was a whole, movement of contact activists in the 1970s in South America. And it was pretty big. And they had local media coverage, and they had actually very good footage of some of their encounters. They make bigger claims of actual face-to-face interactions with entities, but of course there's no pictures of that. But they do have some really good UFO footage from their events there that was documented by local media. And it wasn't just random. They invited the media and said, listen, at this time, this day and this time, there's going to be a sighting. And lo and behold, whatever, Wednesday, 10 o'clock, a ship appears or two ships appear, and there's a whole interaction that goes on. And they're utilizing the same kind of ideas like meditation and consciousness, which is what CE5 is known for. So, and then you want to go back further than that, there's the guy, John D. I forget what year, maybe the 17 or 1800s, and he was using what he called the Enochian magic and having these interaction with angels or, non-human intelligence who were communicating ideas and stuff. So this kind of thing, actually, as the further you go back in time, the further you see that there's some kind of contact between humans and whatever we want to, ascribe to non-human intelligence, some other kind of entities. Again, so that the idea of CE5 really goes way back. However, Dr. Stephen Greer, in my opinion, did probably the most modern job of framing that and, giving people tools to go out and do the work. So his work with that is actually very important in kind of putting that together and kind of rebranding Contact in a way that people say, oh, there's a whole method. You have the CE5 protocols and there's a methodology, and you do that and you can have these interactions. So that's kind of some of the background on CE5 as an idea. Now,
for the purpose of the interview, we'll go with CE5. I know quite a lot of people are very the D word, not disclosure. Why can't I? Divided. I don't know why that escaped me. They're divided on Stephen Greer, and we're going to come to talk about Dr. Greer as well, okay? Because we have to. But going forward just now, we'll go with CE5, okay? And lots of people are asking though, when you've decided personally you've had these experiences and you want to try and contact these beings, engage the phenomenon, as you've called the channel, other people will have their reasons as well. How do you then, or how would you recommend someone goes about starting to even try and contact some other life form or intelligence using CE5, of course?
Okay, so CE5, with, again, under the umbrella of Dr. Stephen Greer, he has his set of protocols, and they work. It's like training wheels, right? So his Dr. Stephen Greer's method is you practice. And he says you can do any form of meditation as far as the basis of it. So you do a meditation for about, however long you want. You can do 20 minutes, 30 minutes, half an hour, or, an hour, whatever it is. So, and after you do your meditation and you're settled down, you have a clear, calm mind, your monkey mind that has all these random thoughts is kind of relaxed to an extent. Then you go through what he calls coherent thought sequencing. And Dr. Stephen Greer describes the coherent thought sequencing as either remote viewing or kind of like an advanced version or coherent version of visualization, because, not everybody believes that they can remote view or whatever. That's almost beside the point. But you go through a visualization process of, using your mind's eye or your inner vision to look basically through the universe and visualize that you're connecting with these non-human intelligences, and you vector them by, visualizing backwards to where you are on Earth, in your state, city, town, backyard, wherever you are. So you actually go through that process called coherent thought sequencing for another, 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, visualizing that you're peering out with your mind's eye into the universe to see some of these entities or beings or intelligences, and then visually guiding them back to your location. And that's basically Greer's main claim to fame as the CE5 protocols.
Now, one of the issues is that Stephen Greer also has his app, which you can pay a one-off fee for. And listen, in this field, different people have different ways of making money or funding what they do. Even what I do, what you do, takes time, takes money for equipment, costs, all that sort of stuff as well, okay? But you can obviously pay for the app, which talks you through these protocols. Is that correct?
Yes, but anything that's on that app you can find for free. But
okay.
People like having a nice app on your phone. It's dressed up nice. It's organized. I think you can, once it's downloaded, you can access everything offline. So if you're in like a dead zone area, you can just listen to meditations on there. But it's not going to be any different from any of his guided meditations that you can find on YouTube and download to your phone.
Okay, and we'll come back to some of the issues people have had with that as well. But that's how it's done and the idea behind it. What sort of experiences can people expect, or what results can they expect to get from one of these successful meditations?
Right. Well, I kind of want to say on the side, maybe you want to talk about it later, but those are the CE5 protocols that I was just discussing before. But that's literally the idea of it being training wheels is basically it's a kind of big thing, and you don't have to do those protocols. You can literally sit still and just do nothing and have it happen. But I'll get into that later, I guess. But the kind of you can't really expect what's going to happen, and there's a whole range that can occur, and it all depends on the individual. I guess you can say their affinity to contact. There's so many unknowns that when you're talking about CE5, like, I can go out and dictate and say, you should expect this based on this experience level or whatever. But again, as you can see, I had all these kind of, pretty extreme experiences, and I didn't do CE5 at all. And again, there has to be some kind of reason how that occurred. Generally speaking, depending on what you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. So if you're kind of going out and you're like, oh, I'm going to do a 20-minute meditation outside and look in the sky, you might, you'll probably you could see like some of the orbs that people report. And again, there's levels of interaction. So if it's something that's questionable as a satellite, you can use satellite apps like Heavens Above. Also, there was an app called Space Junk that showed you space debris. I don't know if that one's around anymore. So there's different apps you can use to discern if you're looking at something conventional. And if you see something like an orb that's passing by and it's flashing on a pattern like every 7 seconds or so, that's the rotation of the object, and it's very likely space junk or something like that. But again, you can see some of these orbs, and the key with CE5 or in a bigger picture contact work is the interaction. So the quality of interaction is going to define as if it's a genuine CE5 or not, because a lot of times, many people new to it, it's actually their first time really sky watching. So a lot of things they see in the sky, they kind of jump at and like, oh, it worked. Well, you're going to have to really do your homework. And a lot of people, of course, they're just getting into it. They're expecting to see something, and they see something in the sky that is, lights up. So they assume, it's contact and that's not always the case. So that's something to keep in mind. You want to, something that you see in the sky, you want to kind of go down a process of elimination and try to find out what it is. And when you come to the thing of like, okay, it's an unknown, that's a genuine CE5. So again, with these orbs, right? Some things you can see stationary flashing in the sky, or you'll see it jump from point to point. And when I mean jump to point, I don't mean like flash here and then come a few inches over and flash here in the sky. I mean, it's a clear, distinguished flash here, and then like a second later, a few feet up in your eyes, which would be thousands of feet, just blip in there and kind of like dance around the sky like that. You're obviously dealing with something that's anomalous. And if it's responsive to your thought process and awareness, that's another kind of key indicator. So if you're seeing this orb and, you think in your mind, okay, is it really contact? And it stops and then does, that's obviously another indicator of something kind of strange. And there's a whole spectrum of things you can see. Okay, so you could see like a few orbs in the sky, something like that. There's times when there are orbs that come down on ground level. And I know people that have done UFO field work that's not CE5 that have had this happen. And there's people that are experiencers. I think Scott Brown, who runs the group in the field, he's not a CE5er, but he's a field worker. And he's going out with the expect to, to see some kind of contact UFOs. And he's had things like that happen too. So that just shows you how the intention of what you're doing is actually the key role. So there can be lights that come on the sky, but again, a lot of this stuff is unpredictable and it happens very fast. And, unless you have everything set up to pre-record everything that's going on around you, you're probably not going to get some stuff. Now, Dr. Greer has actually recorded some good stuff, but, unfortunately he's got some embarrassing misidentifications as well that kind of muck up. And then people say, oh, well, it's all nonsense. All the documentation he has, which is unfortunate because he has some really good stuff. But again, as far as the spectrum of what can happen, there's stuff like that I'm mentioning, which is on a kind of novice level, just going out once or twice a week. You can experience those things, fairly easily as long as you're serious about it. But then there's somebody in my family, I'll tell you, it was their first CE5. And they knew I was into this and whatever. So they're like, okay, let me try it with you. So I did this. I did a C5 with them. I just did a 20-minute meditation. I'm telling them, like, listen, if nothing happens, don't be concerned. Don't worry about it. We're just testing it out. And this is your first time. I get it. We don't have to like kind of try so hard. So I was not expecting much, and after we did our meditation, they said, I got a message say to look for the colors. And I'm thinking like, I'm skeptical of this person. Even though I shouldn't be, even as somebody with experiences and somebody who was doing the CE5 work for several years at that point. And I'm
that's
like,
good, because you don't have that prerequisite or the bias there that's what it is. So that's good to know, though, that you, sorry to interrupt, but I like that you've got that attitude towards it, that, yeah, but is it happening? Is it legit? Because you're going that little bit extra, you're going that bit further.
Yeah. I even with my own stuff, if and I'll just say this to be clear, that when you have that question, you can still go out and do this work honestly and have a level of skepticism. And when the phenomenon appears, it's not going to make you guess. If it's there, it's going to show you as soon as the question comes to your mind, is this like something legit? It will usually do something where you're like, okay, I got the message, because they're not coming there to waste your time or their time. The intelligence is going to be clear in demonstrating that it is, anomalous phenomena. That's another intelligence. It's not some kind of like, oh, I don't know if that's a satellite. Usually if you think that, it will do something to demonstrate that it is clearly another intelligence. So, this person said, look out for the colors. And I'm kind of thinking like, okay, maybe they just got that in their meditation. And, I didn't think much of it other than that. And, I hope this person doesn't hear me say this, right? So we step out of the room where we're doing the meditation, and two of my other family members are like, somebody's taking pictures from outside. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because they're sitting down in the dark watching a movie. So they have the lights off. And they said, there's flashes of light coming in the house. And I saw it, and the light lit up the inside of the house. And, again, because all the lights are off and they're watching a movie. So I'm like, oh, crap. Okay, I'm already assuming like, okay, I think something's going on at this point, because that's too much of a coincidence. And they didn't know what we were doing. They didn't know we were going to do a C5 or anything like that. They're just innocent bystanders. So I run outside, and my laser was set there by the door. And I don't suggest people use lasers. They're dangerous. Don't use them. So I grab my laser. Disclaimer. So I grab my laser and I go outside, and there's these two, I guess you can say, these two orbs, these two crafts, and they're moving like this. So one's moving in one direction, one's moving the other direction. And I flash my laser in between them, and it goes like this. One flashes like this, and one flashes like this. And I'm like, okay, this is going on. All right. So the person that I did the CE5 with was with me. And as soon as those two kind of flashed at each other, just second by second, the entire sky started to light up. Anywhere you looked in the sky, there were different types of activity. And again, this is somebody's first CE5. And even as CE5s go for me, I've had really extraordinary things happen. But this was the most visually aesthetic, like, F you guys, kind of like we're here kind of thing. I jokingly called it like an intergalactic initiation, just because there, I would look this way, and there was like a purple orb. Clearly in the sky, but I could see it was part of a structure. For many of these different things, there were actually what I perceived as structures around the lights. So there was this purple one over here, and then I'd look somewhere else and there'd be a red one. I'd look somewhere else, there'd be a green one, and they're all kind of either moving or flashing or just stationary. And then, I go inside and I get the other family members that come out here. I think, after that last experience in 2007, they kind of figured they knew. And at this point, this is years later. So they knew I was into CE5 at this point, and they knew I was doing the work. So they came out. And again, this whole thing went on for about a half an hour of all these different lights in the sky like that. And it was just incredible. And there were flash bulbs and there were alleged streakers, which looks kind of like a shooting star, but they were making zigzags in the sky and coming from different directions, like second after second after second. This is another one of those things where I thought this was going to kind of be in the media in some way, just because there was an overwhelming amount of activity. And I don't like to tell the story and like get people's hopes up of could happen, because I've had a lot of great experiences, but even to this day, this one was the most visually like in your face, other than that metal disc that was like really low, because it was insane, the amount of anomalous phenomena that was going on. And then towards the end of it, there were actually orbs down on the ground, just a few feet away from me, and they were almost in like a structure. So there was like 3 here, 4 here, 2 here, and almost like they were kind of aligned in like almost a pyramid structure. And these were like yellow orbs, and they wor pulsing or whatever. And I was I was like freaking out, even with experience at this point, because again, this is just not expected. I kind of kick myself for this, but the only reason I guess that this thing ended was because I'm like, I got to go get my friend, one of my friends who does CE5 with me, my friend Dave. So I'm like, I got to go get Dave. I got to get Dave, because he was supposed to do a CE5 with us that night. And then, I was getting ready to leave alone. Everybody else was going to stay there. And so I can go get my friend Dave so he can see this, because this, he does CE5 with me over almost, we were doing it maybe 3-4 times a week at that time. And me and him had never seen something like this together during CE5. We saw the typical stuff I was explaining before. So that was extraordinary. And that happened during a legit CE5. So I did the CE5 process, and this kind of event happened.
So again, incredible experience. Now, taking you back a little bit before I circle around to my next question here, I'm one of those people that I would love to try it. I'm a little impatient though, so the idea of meditating, especially for me, is a bit, really, I'd be like constantly thinking, how long's it been? Must have been 20 minutes. Okay, it's been 30 seconds. But like I've said before, where I live, it's a very clear sky. So when I'm taking my dog for a walk at night, I will walk about with my head basically looking up at the stars. Given my interest in what I do, I've got a UFO podcast. I'm interested in CE5, remote viewing, aliens, all of the above. I'm clearly looking for something. You're always looking at the stars for like, I want to see something. So that want or desire is there for a start, okay? Not that I'm filming, I'm just looking. I just want to see something, whether it's a triangle, a craft, or a light moving, or a flash. Now, I've looked out before, and when I've just been in the mood, I've just had that thought to myself, or I've spoken out loud, or quietly, and just went, if there's anything up there, quite happy to see something, and you're just scanning the sky, any lights, show me something, and regularly nothing happens. And okay, I don't spend long doing it, but there's been quite a few occasions, more than 3, 4, 5, where I've been looking, I've said that, and a light's come across. Now, I'm quite used to seeing the ISS space station passes over all the time. I'm used to seeing satellites going along, and they've got that kind of slow, steady pace they have as they go along, the light in the sky. So I'm used to that kind of stuff in aircraft and what as well. But there's been occasions where lights moved along and I've went, okay, and you're thinking to yourself, that's interesting. I've said that and this light's popped into view. Could be a satellite. Show me something else, and you get the flash or the pulse. And for me, I tend to go, okay, that's interesting, and I kind of stop there. I've also seen lights that have moved a little bit and seemed to wave in and out. I know when you're looking at stars or lights in the sky, they can appear just from the dimmer of the light, they can appear to move in ways they actually aren't. But I've seen lights that have quite clearly waved in and out of. You can see the stars against the background where you can see them moving in and out. And again, I kind of stop at that point of, okay, maybe that's something, maybe it's not. You have described an intense experience on the other end of the spectrum, so I've probably had quite basic light, incidents. If that was real, encounters as such, it may have been something else, like you say, could have been space junk. Who knows? We're never going to find out. But what I want to know is, why would these entities or intelligences even bother to show up for Andy or James when we're doing whatever we're doing? What do you think is their purpose or reason for even bothering to put in any level of effort to show themselves because someone has asked?
This goes back. So during that 2007 experience, I part of that whole experience, I guess, like I said, was a download, and I clearly got the communication that they kind of either want or have a relationship with us. And again, these are impressions I'm getting, and I'm interpreting them. I don't know if they're representational. I don't know if these are my own thoughts kind of based on, but so I tend to think that they want some kind of engagement with us. I don't know why, but I clearly did get that message. And, that was another reason why I was really pushing forward with the CE5 work. Because it's like we're, building this communication that whoever, maybe when open contact finally happens, there's going to be more to say about that. I don't know. But to me, it clearly, I clearly got the message that they wanted some kind of interaction with us, so that's my own personal thought on that.
Now, when we're talking about these beings or entities, Stephen Greer, and we're mentioning him a lot, and I'm sure most people listening are aware of who Stephen Greer is, but if you're not, then the movies or documentaries are available on Netflix and Amazon Prime, and go and do a little bit of digging and research as well, just to kind of see that the basics of why we're talking about what we are. But Stephen Greer pushes the idea that whatever these are, they are very friendly. They are trying to help us as a species, give us warnings and messages that, we're going about things the wrong way, especially when it comes to weapons. And he's very much against the idea of a threat narrative, and what previously TTSA and Luis Elizondo and people like that are now potentially going down that route of. Do you subscribe to the idea that whatever these entities are, they're all coming from another planet, another solar system? Do you think it's multiple things happening at once, different realities and dimensions coming in? What's your personal thoughts, given your experiences, on where these beings are from potentially and what their kind of message is?
Okay, so yeah, that's two questions there. I during all the interactions I had, there have been distinct differences where, like the one that happened in 2007, the one where I was asked to come outside, that they told me they were extraterrestrials. They told me that they were ET in that download thing. So I don't know if that was literal, or because at that time I was not as deep into the work now, where I'm like, okay, there's extradimensionals, interdimensionals, extra dimensionals, time travelers. I only had that concept really at that time for UFOs, for the most part. UFOs are extraterrestrials. So I don't know if that plays a factor in it, but they told me that they were extraterrestrials. I don't know if that's true. But I've had interactions, before and after that were distinctly different, where I'm like, okay, it doesn't have the same quality of feeling. The phenomenon manifests or appears in different ways. I think we're dealing with several different intelligences. I think we're being engaged by probably, and I hate to make this sound like a blanket statement, but all of the above. I think we're dealing with beings from different dimensions. I think we're actually dealing with different physical entities that are from this universe, so we could call them extraterrestrial biological beings. So I think we're dealing with a lot of different things, and I think they all probably have, or at least some of them have different agendas. That's just my own personal take on at this time. So I'm subject to change on that, but that's how I feel based on everything that I experienced and all the research I've done. But I do. Again, this is just a personal belief. I do have a feeling that there is a group of these intelligences that are looking out for us. People might not like that, but that's just how I feel. Honestly, I think that some of these, even if some of these entities don't have our best interests, that it's possible that what we could call the benevolent ones, the ones that do have some kind of stake, at least in this planet and us for whatever reason, they're not going to let them interfere with us to the extent of like, oh, they're going to just come invade this planet or whatever.
Now, what has been the biggest change for you in your time involved with CE5? Have you had any major shifts of mindset that you've had one opinion and it's totally changed at this point? Is there anything you would potentially even look back on and tell yourself at the start of your journey, actually, you thought this, but this is the way to go about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's constantly kind of evolving. When I first heard a lot of Dr. Greer's stuff, I actually took a lot of what he said more seriously, but I questioned it. So after my own investigations, I don't come to a lot of the same conclusions as him. So a lot of those things change. He talks about my labs and even like, again, that all these entities are peaceful, and even his own message has changed with that. And if you really press him on that, he's not going to say, okay, they're all peaceful. But he's going to say they're not hostile. So that, yeah, some of my thoughts have changed over that. I've become more agnostic in a sense where, like after the contact and first getting into CE5, I felt like I had more of it figured out. And, the more I really investigated and kind of like in a Zen koan way or self-inquiry model, really questioning myself constantly and realizing how little I know, even as, because a lot of times you'll come across this kind of phenomena where, experiencers feel like they have all the answers. But I've taken the approach that, even with all the contact you can have, you don't have all the answers, no matter who you are. And so I'm a big proponent of that, where it's like, I don't believe the experiencers have all the answers. I think they have one important piece, but so does everybody else.
There will be people listening to this right now who have decided off the back of your advice and experiences and decide, you know what, I'm going to give this a go. What advice would you give them?
For CE5?
Yeah.
Oh, man. I mean, look at every available source and, do what you're so inclined to do. I mean, there's a great free PDF by Celia Hatch called a CE5 handbook. And you can find that on Google. I can probably get you a link to that. And it's a free PDF download. And that has several different approaches to CE5, where, again, the basis with CE5 is the intention to have contact. And the further you kind of, or, the more you invest in that, the greater probability you're going to have of having an interaction of some sort. And, I can't dictate to what level you're going to have an experience. But, generally people who take it seriously and give it a serious go and put time and effort into it are going to get some kind of interaction. So there's a lot of stuff on, again, I know people might not like Stephen Greer, but he has a ton of stuff on YouTube where he's got guided meditations, even just talking about some of the philosophy. And when it comes to that, he's actually very knowledgeable. Even though he's had his share of fumbles, his work with CE5 is incredible. He's, again, that's part of what drew me to Dr. Greer early on was that when he was describing contact and how it happens and the experiences, it was exactly as I had experienced. So he knew what he was talking about. So there is a lot of good stuff on his CE5 stuff on his YouTube channel. You can just watch for free. Again, search around for different contact modalities. And the most important thing is to practice them, right? So if you want to have a general CE5 experience, you might have to practice at it for a few weeks or months even to have something where it's like a truly anomalous event, and everybody's different. So I've had friends that, they had to come out with me for a few months before they felt comfortable doing it on their own. And they actually, they came with me to this awesome event. We saw this golden craft come in super low, which was incredible. But again, that's somebody who was really, it took him a while to kind of catch on to it. But after a few months, he was doing it on his own and he started his own team. So it just takes, the most important thing is that you practice it and consistently, because if you practice it for 2 weeks and then drop it for a month, that's like, you go to the gym for 2 weeks and then you stop going for a month. Your progress is going to dampen.
Yeah. Listen, before we get to listener questions, I do want to talk for a few minutes on Dr. Stephen Greer, okay, and some of those practices. Like you say, my opinion, and it's only my opinion, it's not right or wrong, or, Stephen Greer is someone who I think started out with the best intentions, and even you've alluded to the fact over the years his message has changed and he's had some fumbles. Now, one of my big issues is not someone attempting to make some money. If this is what he left, quite a lucrative career, didn't he? He's a surgeon, so he could have made a lot of money doing that anyway. However, he has and still does charge extortionate amounts of money, what some may seem $2,000 or $3,000 to sit on the beach with him and have CE5 experiences as he talks about it. And there's been controversies around those, that potentially on one occasion there was a local flight school had records where a pilot was basically dropping flares out off the coast. Now, I've not heard of many of these experiences with Dr. Greer ending in disappointment, which you would think, just given the nature of what you're trying to do, there surely would be some times where nothing happened, and that's not Dr. Greer's fault or the people that he's with. So where do you sit with the practice where Dr. Greer is at now? Of this does generate a lot of revenue for him. There's no escaping that. The amount of money he can charge for some of these experiences, and do you see why people have turned away from Dr. Greer's message?
Yeah, I mean, I've as somebody who's kind of looked at in the CE5 community as a leader of sorts, I created the social media around CE5. I mean, when he first started charging, because it used to be a lot cheaper. It was way cheaper years ago. And as soon as he upped the price, I contacted CSETI leadership and I said, what are you guys doing? And they said, yeah, I understand what you're saying, James, but this is Stephen, this is Dr. Greer's call. There's nothing we can do about it, kind of thing. So, I mean, really, I've been open in the CE5 community saying, listen, you do not need this training. It's a novelty to go out with Dr. Greer. Yeah, if you're following Dr. Greer's work, it's cool to go out with him, especially when it was cheaper. But it by no means is it needed at all. You could just get up, start this on your own. I know a lot of people who have. I don't think there's anybody in ufology that's made more money than Dr. Stephen Greer, for whatever that's worth. I'm completely against monetizing CE5 to that degree. I can see, okay, you want to cover the cost of renting the space? Sure. You need to make a little money for yourself for investing time? Sure. But what he's done is outrageous, and it's hurt the community. It's hurt CE5, So, in some ways, Dr. Stephen Greer is CE5's greatest enemy. So he's kind of become the biggest obstacle. And, years ago, early on, and, he was promoting it, and, people were skeptical at first, but, now, so you have this event with the flares, which those are flares. There's no question that those are flares. You can see the sequence that they appear and the sequence in which they disappear and the slow way they drift, all consistent with flares. You cannot prove those are not flares. I can say I've been to see SETI events with Dr. Greer where there was genuine contact, where you couldn't fake it if you had all the money in the world. It's just things occurred that, you couldn't fake. But again, this flare thing is a big question. I can't say one way or another that he staged it. There was a search and rescue that same night close by in Florida. I don't know if that was far enough away where you could have seen flares from that. It was a Coast Guard search and rescue. But again, CE5's biggest obstacle has become Dr. Greer. But at the same time, it's so difficult. And I'll tell you, for somebody like me, it's really difficult to to deal with. It's almost like I have to take the term CE5 and use something else altogether because of the flack it's gotten because of Dr. Greer. But, and you have this thing where at the same time he put out the CE5 film, and now millions of people are aware of CE5, where kind of like in the other films, it's like people got like a taste of it, but he just put out this huge film, reached millions and millions of people. You got people like Demi Lovato promoting it. And it's like, it's a double-edged sword because you need that awareness spread, not even of CE5, say per the name, but the awareness that people have the innate ability, whether through the UFOs technology or just whatever, that you can reach out to this intelligence and it can respond, that you can have contact. So there's that part where it's like he's been more instrumental than anybody on this planet for opening that idea to people. Even though some of the past attempts at it, like Mission Rama and stuff, had close contact encounters, no one has come close to spreading the awareness of the basic idea of CE5 than Dr. Greer. So it is what it is, right?
Yeah, I appreciate the honesty in that answer, and the way I see it with Dr. Greer is, like I say, he had the best intentions and a real message to go out with at the start, and that's changed over the years, largely due to money and celebrity, call it what it is. And I think a lot of what it is with Dr. Greer now is it's cult of personality, that people are willing to pay $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000 or whatever it is, not necessarily just for the experience, but they buy into him and they trust him blindly, and it's almost a faith. You don't want to say cult in its sense, but cult of personality, that they're going because it's him that's doing it, which, like you say, is a shame because it does damage a potentially what seems to be very noble and incredible practice to go in for. What I want to just ask on that is, I asked Michael Mazzola when I spoke to him. Now, if people are new to the podcast, and there are thousands of you that haven't heard the stuff from just last year, I interviewed Michael Mazzola, who was the director of Unacknowledged and CE5, which were Dr. Greer's, some of his documentaries, and they're available on Netflix, Amazon Prime, and stuff like that as well. And I asked Michael Mazzola that if this practice is so incredible, and Dr. Greer claims to be someone still at the forefront, if not the go-to guy for this, okay, why does he not, reaching out for that 1% that he talks about, get, with the resources he has, not even just money, but connections, a live news crew, head to a landmark, get a group, and perform CE5 live on TV, get some stuff to come overhead, not even the most incredible, but just something to appear, and then surely that would be the message for that. Why do you not think that that's happened in modern day?
I don't know. Actually, in I forget which film it was in. He did one where, again, it wasn't for the public. I mean, they recorded it, but for one of those, I actually think it was serious, unfortunately, because that film is highly controversial because of the Atacama, which is a whole nother
Yes, yeah, it is, yeah.
hazard. But they actually they got really good footage in that. But again, yeah, man, that's something that it needs to be experimented with. And again, we were talking before about location. I was in Midtown Manhattan on the roof of a building, and I did CE5 and had an absolutely incredible experience on several occasions. Again, in Midtown Manhattan, I'm up by myself on the roof of this building when I'm doing it, but I think it has the potential to be done. There should probably be somebody should lead that initiative, because again, there's going to be your trials and errors, and you probably want to do it with a smaller group, just because you generally get a better response with small coherent groups. I was at an event with like 200 people for a CE5, and it everybody's participation alters how the contact can unfold. So when they have events like Contact in the Desert, and they do like a mass CE5 with, I don't know how many people are at those Contact in the Desert events, a lot of people, but it's never like what happens at a genuine contact expedition. When you have like anywhere from 2 to 20 people that are on the same page, you're going to get much better results than if you have 50 people, 100 people, kind of half of them taking it seriously, half of them not in the mood or whatever it is. So I would say if you want to do something serious like that, you need a highly trained, well, I don't want to say highly trained team, like you need specialists, but you want the best results, get the people that have the most success. Get a good group of people together and do an initiative like that. That's what you got to do, I think. That would be my best approach. Get like a group of 5 to 10 or 15 people and go around with, again, you can't base the whole thing on just one night, right? So the phenomenon has a stake in what's going on. For whatever reason, they'll choose to respond when they want to, basically. They're running the show. So part of it depends on that. So it would have to be an initiative undertaken, not like, oh, we're going to go out one night with Fox News and try to get a response. It could happen. Yeah. I guess there have been people that have attempted live stream CE5s and have gotten okay results. But it's not an initiative dedicated to that. And I think that you would probably need one like that.
James, we'll move on to listener questions. For the listener listening to this, thanks for joining us. I'll split this into 2 parts just so you can take a breather yourself, because James has talked about a lot of very intense and deep experiences as well. So we'll move on to listener questions next. Okay, so James is still with me. We're going to move on to listener questions. First up, listener question is from Dave Smethurst. Dave sent in a lot of questions, and I had to be careful what I picked. He wants to know, regarding your recent interview with Lou Elizondo, what were 3 of the main things that you took away from it?
Oh, well, one, that some way, somehow, contact experiences were observed in ATIP as actually a part of their study. And, Lou was very careful not to get into that, so I thought that was fascinating. The remote viewing question was, and that's kind of related, but that, I was not expecting that. I was just expecting him to say no, kind of, really. I just wanted to ask her to cover that base. So I asked it, and his response was very interesting. And, I guess a third one would be, the way he really was open to the CE5 community, and, nobody had asked him about it. So I thought he was great at communicating that.
See, I'm just going to follow up on that. If you had Lou for an interview tomorrow and he said, right, you've got one follow-up question, do you know off the top of your head what your follow-up question would be?
Oh, man. I actually had it. Oh, I didn't ask him if he ever had a CE5 experience.
I mean, you know what he's going to say to that, but
still,
it's how he answers it tells you
right.
What you need to know, doesn't it? Just now as well.
Because we've known that he's had some kind of experience. We didn't know if there was an interactive mental quality.
And you know what? It depends when you speak to Lou. Given I spoke to Lou on the 1st of February and I asked him about CE5, Lou's answer was, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So at that point, he was not ready to speak about that. But yet you look where we are 4 months down the line and how much more. And it's like you got him at a time where you asked the right question in the right way and he expanded on it. And I think, again, someone like you, speaking to Lou in 6 months' time, that question gets answered potentially in a different way to it would tomorrow. So I think that's the good thing with a guy like Lou and someone like yourself opening that door with those questions that you did ask that were really cool.
Yeah.
Next up, Strange Farm had a question. What are some meditation practices that he could do at home to better the chances of contact?
Okay, so I don't want to direct anybody down a particular path. I think you kind of just go with what feels right to you. But if I were to suggest meditation practices, I would say try 2 or 3 different types of techniques and try them each for for a few weeks at a time. So take one technique and try it for 2 or 3 weeks, because you're not going to try a new technique and that day or the next day you're like, man, I know what they're talking about now when they talk about enlightenment and meditation. It's just like, working out at the gym. You have to build that muscle, and some meditation techniques work better with others. So some people like mantra. So where you recite a mantra in your mind and, you do it for 5 minutes. And then when you realize that your mind starts drifting, you do the mantra again for a few minutes until you're into like a center of stillness. Or you can do a pranayama technique, which, again, any of these techniques I'm mentioning, just Google. You can do a pranayama technique, which there's like hundreds of different types. And, again, you practice the pranayama for a few weeks and see how that feels for you. And then there's something like Vipassana, which is another mindfulness-based technique. And again, try a few of those techniques and see which one works the best for you, which one you feel like the most centered and tranquil with, and stick with that one.
Awesome. Good question. And the next one, I find a really interesting question. This one is from James also. James is one of the Patreons over at patreon.com. And he wants to know, is James aware of if those on the autistic spectrum are at all disadvantaged to success with CE5, mainly concerning understanding of emotions and also ability to project thoughts out?
Wait, can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so James wants to know if you're aware if people who are on the autism spectrum are disadvantaged to having any success with CE5, coming from a point of view that they can have difficulty understanding emotions and also projecting thoughts out.
I can't say from personal experience yes or no. However, there's also the possibility that they could be superior at it for whatever reason, because you have people that are on that spectrum that are freaking highly skilled at things where it's amazing. So, again, everything's trial and error. So I don't want to categorize people saying, these kind of people, because they're this way are good or bad at it. This person's not good at art, so they're probably not going to be good at CE5. It has to be an independent thing. For all you know, they're going to be better at it than anybody else.
Yeah, I did wonder that reading the question. Is it a case of they're tuned into something that most people aren't? And
right.
They have their success in that way. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that one, James. Good question, though. Thanks for that one. The Drawing Board wants to know, they were intrigued when you brought up the Collins Elite with Lou, and Lou categorically stated that he could not talk about that. And they thought it was a really interesting line of conversation, and they just want to know what you thought about Lou's answer or where that could go.
Well, I think... whether you call them the Collins Elite or whatever it is, there is such a group. Dr. Eric Davis, in an interview, I believe, with Alejandro Rojas, said, the Collins Elite, or those kind of fundamental religious people that believe UFOs are demons, are the ones who shut down OSAP. They're the ones who got OSAP canceled. And I think in one of the unidentified episodes, I'm not sure if it was season 1 or season 2, they kind of alluded to a group like that. So there is a legitimate group like that there that is an obstacle to this subject, and they have used their power to minimize any kind of progress. There's again, when you get into anything like the Collins lead or Majestic 12 or anything, there's going to be a whole lot of smoke, but there is something there. There's a spark of reality there. So there was work done by like Nick Redfern talking about the Collins elite, and I believe a gentleman named Ray Boucher. And I remember he did a really good episode, I think, on Linda Moulton Howe's The Phenomenon when it was still on KGRA radio. So there's some stuff out there. Again, that's kind of like to inform yourself of, just to be aware of. You can go down a whole rabbit hole with that. My friend Scott Brown actually advised, if people are interested in the Collins elite, they can't say if it's exactly related to it, but there's a correlation there of a movie on Netflix called The Family, and it's talking about this very powerful family of Christian fundamentalists that they have a lot of power and they do things in politics. So that's some thought on that.
Nice answer. And A Waif Soul sent in a few questions. They want to know, do you think practicing CE5 leads to an increase in sightings or contact over time?
For the entire planet? Like collectively?
No,
or individually?
I suppose for you, the way I'm reading the question is, if you're practicing CE5, do the sightings get more frequent, more intense over time, or is there still that haphazard nature to how they appear?
Yeah, I mean, there becomes a point where it's like second nature. So when you're well practiced, and again, you can always, and they talk about this in the Yoga Sutras, that you can always go backwards, so there's always the potential to go backwards, but when you're really well practiced, like you never really forget how to ride a bike. I mean, if you haven't ridden a bike in a few years, you take a few minutes and you kind of get back into it. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the more you do it, the more likely you are to have sightings. Because once you get the feeling of it, right? Because there's a distinct feeling to genuine contact. And once you're really used to that feeling, you can kind of go to that right away. And, you don't even necessarily have to be doing a CE5 to get into that and have something happen. And just in case the guy was asking that on a macro scale, I do think there's a potential for more people doing more CE5 equaling more sightings for the planet. So both, I'll say both, yes to both.
Cool. Next up, we've got the quickfire round. So I'm going to mention a few topics or names that we've not managed to talk about in the body of the interview, and you can give your thoughts as short or as long as you want on each one, okay? And the first one is quite timely. It's the upcoming UAP Task Force report.
Yeah, so I think that we're probably, again, we already know that whatever the report's going to say is going to be saying it's not ours. So everything that's being talked about with these unidentified aerial phenomena, it's not our technology. I see this as a stepping stone. So I think that there's going to be hopefully a lot of media hype around it, probably a buzz for a few weeks. Overall, it's good, even though, I know people want to hear about Roswell and stuff. We're not going to get anything like that. I don't even know if we're going to get any of the nuclear cases, and if we don't, why? I think Christopher Mellon's questions may be indicative of what we see and don't see in the report. I think he's kind of in the know, and he asked those questions as like the next step. But again, it's a step forward. It's progress. I think that it will, and again, you see all these Congress people, right? Like they're making some of them are saying some pretty crazy things. So you could just see that now people are more open to talking about it. So that's progress. I think it's a good thing. And again, necessary stepping stone moving forward, not the end.
And I'd just like to mention on that, with the Congress people talking about this the way they are and using terminology that we're not used to them saying, and just standing outside these massive buildings saying, yeah, alien technology or not human or from somewhere else or outside our galaxy, however they mean it. they're saying it. And I appreciate people get in touch with me and they'll tell me, oh, but this guy's got this politics, or this one said this about this. Being from the UK, I suppose I don't have that knowledge or direct knowledge or bias that I'm left or right for whatever I don't know their background or what they do or don't vote for. I just know they're talking about a subject I'm passionate about. So I appreciate that. What they're like as human beings, I don't know. And it's kind of hard to tell, but they're talking about the subject, which does have a positive impact. So
yeah. And listen,
that's a good thing.
I'm an American and I don't give a shit what their politics are, and people aren't going to like that. I don't care. If I'm looking at, this is bipartisan, right? If they're going to be part of the solution, good. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm going to vote them into office, but them talking about this openly is, number one, it's progress, and hopefully will encourage others to. And number two, it's an indicator of where we are, right? So I'm not saying like, oh, they said that, let's just vote for them. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's showing you where we are in the time, and people are willing to step up and talk about it. That's what we need.
Absolutely. Next one is Bob Lazar.
Bob Lazar, super interesting. Now, the guy was exposed to classified information. Okay, I don't know how he was, but you just saw. I think I don't know if it was the Drive or somebody just did an article on those hand scanners, right? There's so many interesting things in his story that I have to believe that he was either exposed to classified information or part of some kind of strategic release of information, because there's no way that he could have known about secret classified testing of whatever those objects were in that recorded video. There's no way he could have known about the classified test sites, a classified test flight of whatever those objects were. He knew about Area 51, which was not really well known back then. So he had access to different pieces of information that were classified. So he's either legit in what he was saying, or he knew somebody that was in some kind of classified program over there that was feeding him information. But the issue I have with that is, I don't think he would have staked his entire reputation and future if some guy was telling him some kind of weird stuff. And you know what I mean? Like he jeopardized a lot of his future, whether, the stuff, he went out and said the things he said, and he really jammed himself up, right? There's no going and doing everything he did and saying, okay, I'm just going to get another job at a classified facility, which, he was at Los Alamos, right? We know that George Knapp had found him in the phone book, whether as a contractor or not. So there's no way he's like, this is a great idea to further my career in life.
Yeah. So
I can't say that he did everything that he said he did. I find it extremely fascinating, and I think that there is a potential that he's telling the truth on everything. I mean, at least from his point of view, I think I have that well on the table. I'm not willing to discount that he's just making it up.
Do you prefer the term UFO or UAP?
I don't really care one way or the other. I'm fine to using whatever terminology is appropriate for the conversation. I like UFO; it's cool, but I understand how UAP is more accurate. UAP is not a new term; it's been used more recently. But I like both of them. I think unidentified aerial phenomena is a really cool way of accurately describing some of the things that we see.
And finally, what does disclosure mean to you?
Man, for me personally, on a personal level, I would say that, no, I guess I have a few things. Like if we're not hearing about like Roswell and legit crash retrievals, which did happen, that's not exactly disclosure. Disclosure, I guess would mean the release of the truth, right? I think we're going to get incremental partial disclosures. And I mean, I can't argue against that, right? It's great to see this stuff finally come out. But I would say that like a genuine disclosure would be a release of most of the information, like saying, yeah, we have crash retrievals. We have alien technology. We have alien beings, or, whatever, however you want to say it. We have them in our possession, and we've had them for decades. Something to that effect. And even like a post disclosure for me would be where, like, obviously the entire world acknowledges it. It can't be something like, a whistleblower comes out and says it and it's questionable. It has to be like, the U.S. president is, or someone to that effect is saying, or another president of another country, I guess, says like, okay, UFOs are real. They represent a non-human intelligence that has been engaging us. And to go further than that, I guess some kind of actual open interaction with these beings.
Awesome. James, how can people get in touch with you and follow your work?
I'm engaging the phenomenon on Twitter, engaging the phenomenon on YouTube. I encourage people to reach out to me through social media. I'm also on Instagram, but Twitter, really, if you want to get in touch with me, get me on Twitter.
Awesome. And I'm going to steal James just for 2 more minutes over on Patreon, and I'm just going to be asking him what is his favourite UFO case or piece of evidence. Join us on Patreon or Apple subscriptions for that one, folks. Thanks for joining us, James.
Sure thing. Yeah.
Hi to everyone on Apple subscriptions and patreon.com. I've still got James Iandoli with me. I had to think about that one. I think I got it right. And I'm going to be asking James, just for all of you who subscribe to the podcast and give a little something back. James, what is your favourite either piece of evidence or UFO case?
Yeah, one of my favorite cases actually is the Hudson Valley UFO case. It's the Hudson Valley UFO wave. And part of that is because I live in Westchester, New York. I live in the actual Hudson Valley. A lot of people in my area, some of them are older now, but had seen a lot of sightings back then in the 80s for that wave. And actually, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, one of the last books that he worked on, he co-authored it. It's called Night Siege, the Hudson Valley UFO Wave. So I always found that as a fascinating case, I guess you can say, because it's an entire wave. It spanned for several years. You're talking about I have Indian Point over here, like just a few miles away, and that's a nuclear facility. So you have the interaction with UFOs and nukes. There was actually a helicopter chase with a UFO that's not so well known during that flap that happened. So it's very rich in that component. You got the contact, you got the UFOs and nukes thing, even though they're not ICBMs, it's just a nuclear facility, power generation. So I find that as a fascinating case. But just to list off a few other cases, I do really like the Phoenix Lights, just because you had this massive sighting, and if that was some kind of U.S. test of secret tech, not a good idea, man.
It wasn't too secret,
right? And then you have Fife Symington, who was the mayor at the time, and he kind of laughed it off at first to try to lighten the mood. And then he comes out with James Fox just a few years later saying, first of all, he was an Air Force pilot. So he's a trained observer. And he said he personally saw the Phoenix Lights. He saw the craft. It was blocking out stars. It was tremendous, completely silent. And he was amazed. So that's another great case. And actually, if you go read the book that was written by Dr. Lynn Katai, there's a lot of stuff going on that people aren't aware with, that during that time, people were having contact experiences, CE5s, and contact experiences. So there was a whole lot going on that's not talked about as well. So I really like those cases. And of course, just as like a UFO guy, I love Roswell. Just an absolutely fascinating case. So many interesting witness testimonies from different angles. You had the coroner, You had that woman, I forget her name, something June, where she was showing materials, the memory material that gentleman researcher James Clarkson found her. And there's so many different, Colonel Corso, which something, I always found the Colonel Corso story very interesting. But having somebody like Dr. Eric Davis go on the record and say he investigated Colonel Corso's claims and they panned out, meaning there was truth to it. So for somebody like Dr. Eric Davis, who's probably a lot deeper in this than many people realize, saying that some of those claims were legit is very convincing to me.
James, you've been very generous with your time. Thanks very much for joining us.
It's been great being on, man. You take care.
Cheers. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative gamma state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what it is because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes. It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the class between that sun and moon? Got sleep paralysis and got me in my room.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.